Hi, Egg. Are you at least 18?
Hello, how you doing?
Doing okay. How are
Yes.
you? Okay. And what God do you believe in?
Jesus.
Okay. And what's the best argument or evidence that provides rational justification to believe in the Christian God?
I have many reasons, but I'd like to bring forward the moral argument.
Fantastic. Do you want to present the argument?
Yeah. Uh, I believe in that there is an underlining, undeniable, objective morality, and because of that, then the existence of a God exists.
Yeah. Okay.
That's
Fantastic. Is it okay if I put this into like what I would consider the formal syllogism version of that argument?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Um, and now I'm going to put it up here, but then you can tell me if I'm misrepresenting because that's not my intention. Okay.
I mean, I'd rather. Oh, because he's ready. If a moral, what is this? If objective moral facts exist, then God exists. Objective moral facts exist. God exists.
This sounds like the argument that you're giving. Is this an accurate representation of your argument? You gave it the opposite
Yeah.
way. You
Yeah. I mean,
basically
this
said
is
it.
the yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's exactly what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. So here's the issue with this argument. This is a self-defeating argument, and I'll
Well,
I'll explain why. Um,
do you believe in objective morality?
I do, but that's not important. Um,
Really?
yeah. So that's not the issue here. So
Where does it come from?
well here's why I'm going to tell you that this argument fails, right? Because what we're talking about is whether we're not talking about whether or not objective morals exist, because we both agree on that. We're talking about whether or not we can conclude that God exists,
Yeah,
right?
I got you.
Okay. So what I'm going to tell you is that in order for this argument to work, obviously you're going to have this is a valid inference rule. Neither we both know that, right? Obviously, modus ponens is a valid inference rule. Um, but or modus ponens anyway. Whatever. Fuck it, I'm an idiot. But the problem is, obviously, for it to be sound, both of these premises need to be true. And if I asked you, I'm sure that you would, give me supports for why you think these premises are true, and that's great. But here's where the problem is going to come in. If I ask you to support premise two, there are only two ways. There are only two possible ways that you could support premise two. There are two options. The first option is with reference to God. Ooh, I always do that. And then the second option is without reference to God, right? Those are the only, like, obviously there are lots of ways you could explain morals while referencing God, and there are lots of other ways you could explain morals without referencing God. But I'm just saying that these are basically the two categories of ways that you could support this second premise, right?
I would disagree with that. I don't think you can support premise two without a reference to God.
No, I'm just saying that, like, you may say that none of these are successful. I'm just saying that these are the only two options to even attempt, right? Like
Oh,
there isn't a third
yeah,
classification of support for the second premise, right?
yeah. I would agree, but with like me, with my stance is that it's impossible to do that without God. But yeah, I agree.
I totally understand, no problem. But yeah, so it sounds like we're on the same page. So here's the problem. If we try to do this, well, here, you know what? We'll do the second one first. We'll say, what if somebody was giving this argument that you gave, and they tried to defend the second premise without referring to God? Well, then what we would find is that this being able to demonstrate that the second premise is true without referring to God would demonstrate that uh, God is not necessary uh, for objective morals, and that means the way that we'll do this is here. P1 is false, right? If you try to support premise
Yeah,
two with option
yeah.
two, you're basically disproving the first premise in the process, right? So this is a horrible way you would never want to try to, and you're not going to. But I just want to, because these are the only two options, I want to go through both of them. But we can both agree that if you were to try, or if someone, not you, but if someone was to try to support this second premise by doing without referring to God, they would ruin this argument because they would prove the first premise wrong, right?
Hmm.
Okay, fantastic. Now, here's the problem. If you have to refer to God in order to prove that objective morals exist, that means that your argument is now circular.
No. See,
No, here's what's happening. Hold on.
it's not circular.
Yep. Because here's what happens. If you have to refer to God, if God's existence, if you have to appeal to God's existence in order to demonstrate that objective moral facts exist, that means that God's existence is assumed in this premise, and therefore it's a circular argument because you now have the conclusion in the premises. So literally, either way you support that second premise proves that this argument cannot possibly be true.
Okay. I mean, I would disagree with it being circular because I'm not using God to prove that objective morality exists. I'm proving that because objective morality exists, God exists.
Right. Okay. But if I asked you to, in order for this argument to work, you have to provide support for the second premise that objective moral facts exist. If you have to refer to God in order to demonstrate,
but you put your two explanations were with reference to God and without reference to God. So you set up the whole argument to prove your circular argument.
No,
which is incorrect because
I'm telling you that no matter how you do it, the argument. No, what I'm telling you
to support it.
What I'm telling you is that there are only two options. Now, in those options, can I finish an entire thought, please?
Go ahead.
Okay. So there are only two options. We agreed to this before I started giving the explanations. We both agreed that the only ways to support that, or maybe a better way to say this is, every possible way to support this second premise is going to fall into one of these two categories. These are the only two categories of ways that are possible to support this premise. Now, what we both agreed to already is that if you tried to support the second premise without referring to God, you would have defeated the argument by disproving the first premise.
I understand.
Right.
I understand.
So now, I didn't finish. You said you were going to let me
Mm-hmm.
finish. So now the only option, what we know now is this is gone. This isn't an option anymore. What that means is that there's only one category of possible explanations that you could use to defend this second premise. And the problem is, as soon as you refer to God to support the second premise, you've now appealed to your conclusion to support the premise, which makes it a circular argument. That's vicious circularity. The argument then fails. We cannot, that means that it's not a valid argument, right? And obviously, a valid argument can never be sound. And if an argument isn't sound, then we shouldn't accept it. So the problem is the moral argument cannot ever get you to God. It is a self-defeating argument, okay? Do you understand?
I understand what you laid out is a circular argument, but I have a different way of and there's other
okay. So then support the second premise. Support the second premise that objective moral facts exist.
You already agreed that objective moral facts exist.
Okay. Now I'm going to reject it. So go ahead and prove that. Give me the demonstration that objective moral facts exist.
So why are you rejecting it?
Because I know you can't do it without ruining your argument.
So you're just like switching your stance so you can make yourself prove the point?
No, because I would demonstrate objective morals without referring to God, but you said that that's not a viable path to go. So I want you to give your demonstration because mine would be different. My demonstration of objective morals would prove that the first premise is wrong, which then we could reject this argument. So if you can demonstrate premise 2 in a way that doesn't force us to reject this argument, I'm all ears.
Okay. So I think objective moralities exist, and the only explanation for them is God.
Yeah, exactly. So you have to say objective moral facts exist because God exists, and God exists because objective moral facts exist.
That's not what I said.
Yes, it is what you said.
You rephrased it.
I know.
Why don't we type it out? Why don't you type out my argument?
Okay, give it to me.
Objective morality exists. The best explanation for that is God exists.
Okay, so what you're saying is objective morals exist because God exists, right?
You just typed it out. Let me see what you typed out, bro. Am I saying that?
That's what I said. That's what I just typed out, is you said objective morals exist because God exists.
No, I didn't. Okay. Type in...
God is the best
remove the because
explanation for why
objective morals... I said objective morals exist. The best explanation for it is God.
The best explanation for why objective morals exist is God, right?
Yeah, okay, you can go with that.
Yeah. So that means what you're saying is
For a why? No,
We know-
you put the why though. You're putting the proof. It does not rely on God. You first just type out one sentence. Objective morals exist. Premise 2 is best explanation for where they came from is God. Okay, thank you. That's good.
Yeah. So saying the best explanation for where more objective morals came from is God is assuming that God exists and can give an explanation for objective morals. So if this is the way, stop. If this is the way that you're supporting the second premise, what you've now done is assume the existence of God in the premise that you're trying to use to prove God exists. That makes it a circular argument.
But I said the best explanation for
Yeah.
where God.
Yes, you gave a circular argument. If you're not able to see that, I don't know what to tell you.
I'm not able to see that, but
it's a circular argument.
How about we talk about another one?
Okay, what's the so now that we know that argument doesn't work, what's a better argument for God?
Do you want to go for the contingency argument?
What contingency argument do you want to give?
Why, pretty much like everything that exists so far is a contingent on something existing prior.
Okay. Everything that exists currently depends on a prior thing that existed. Right?
Sure.
Okay. So I think that this is actually going to get us. Let me give you an argument here. Oh, that's not the one that I wanted. Wait, isn't that the right one? Where's this argument? Oh, it's right there.
Oh, God. You got your notepad out, man. It would be nice to just have a conversation with you. I don't have a notepad.
Did I tell you that you couldn't have a notepad?
All right, I'll get my notepad out. Hold on, let me get this going. This is fun.
I don't know why you thought you couldn't write things down. Okay. Okay, that's better. I had to make the text smaller because this argument is too girthy.
Oof.
All right. So this is basically what you said, right? Everything that begins to exist is made from something that already exists, right? In fact, here, let's just get rid of all this. Yeah, okay. Yeah. So basically what you said is everything that begins to exist is made from something that already exists, right?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. So let's posit a thing. We'll call it thing X that began to exist. So we're just going to stipulate that for the purposes of the argument. You don't have a problem with that, right?
Yes.
Okay, we're just going to imagine any X that began to exist. For that X that began to exist, there are only two options. Either it was made from other stuff that also began to exist, or it was made from stuff that never began to exist. There are no other options, right?
Hold on, I made this mistake in the last one. I have to go. Everything you usually present at face value sounds like we can follow, but I have to triple check because you have these set up. Just 1 second. Let me just think through this. Either X was made from stuff that also began to exist, or was it made from stuff that never began to exist?
Right. So whatever stuff made X, that stuff either also began at some point, or that is some stuff that never began to exist, right? Those are the only two options.
Or what about it already it came from something that already exists? Oh, never began. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
But you can also say, so it's not a one-dimensional thing because is this going to follow all the way to God? Because
no, I'm giving you an argument. I just am asking you to engage with each premise honestly. So if you engage with this premise 3 honestly, would you agree that for any X that began to exist, if we already know that everything that begins to exist is made from something else that already exists, then for every X that began to exist, it was either made from stuff that also began to exist, or it was made from stuff that didn't begin to exist. I don't see a third option. Is there a third option?
No, I was just thinking about where God would fit into the end of the chain. But
that's not. We don't need to worry about that. I'm just asking you to engage honestly with each premise.
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, so now we're going to explore those two possibilities, right? So let's say X was made from stuff that didn't begin. Well, then that means that that stuff must have been in the universe forever, so the universe must be beginningless. So now we know that of these two options, if we say that it was made from stuff that never began to exist, well, then that means that the universe never began to exist, right?
See, that this is exactly where I knew this was leading. So
I'm just
if
asking you
X
to
is
engage
made,
with this honestly, please.
I hope you know that I am being really honest. I haven't thought through this whole thing too as well. So if X was made from beginningless stuff, then the universe is beginningless.
Right. So if the stuff that X is made out of didn't begin, right? So like every X that has ever began to exist has been made from other stuff that was already existing in the universe. And if there was some X that was made from stuff that didn't have a beginning, then that means that the universe also didn't have a beginning because it must have existed for that beginningless stuff to exist in.
Yeah, okay, I agree. Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
So now we know of these two options, one of them gets us to a universe that doesn't have a beginning, right?
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. And so now there's only one option left of these two options that we laid out in premise 3. The other one is if X is made out of stuff that began to exist. And if we examine that option, what we'll find is that if X was made from stuff that began to exist, then whatever that stuff is, it was also either another X that, just like we talked about in premise 3, was made from stuff that began to exist or stuff that didn't begin to exist. Does that make sense? Or is that too much?
No, it makes sense.
Okay, fantastic. So we know that if X was made from beginningless stuff, then the universe didn't have a beginning. If X was made from stuff that did begin to exist, then that was another X that was also itself made from either stuff with no beginning or stuff with a beginning, right?
Yeah.
And so now what we see is that because we know that those are the only two options, we're going to find that every time we look at it, any X, you could pick any X in the history of the universe, anything that began to exist, and if you examine what it was made out of, you're going to find that you're always going to come to that same option. So the only options we're left with is either either you're going to find the X that was made out of something that didn't begin, which again would lead us to the conclusion that the universe didn't begin, or you're just going to find that every X you look at is going to be made out of some prior thing, and then that thing was made out of some prior thing, and then you have
100%,
yep, and so then there's an infinite chain of things beginning to exist, and so what that means is that the universe must have always existed in order for that beginningless chain or those beginningless things to exist in. So there is no beginning to the universe. If God exists, then God created the universe. But if there's no beginning, it wasn't created, so God doesn't exist.
Okay, see, this is exactly where you went wrong. So I was following all the way through. So your defining of beginningless is actually incorrect because when you say it came from something that's beginningless, that's what you would replace with God. So you're thinking that the universe can either be like the God is beginningless.
Hold on, have we? How? I'm going to change this premise then, because in the universe.
Wait! Why are you changing the premise?
Yeah, because this is the case. Have we ever experienced a thing beginning to exist that was made by something outside of the universe?
Bro, you just changed the whole thing. Is that what just happened?
What I'm asking you.
Brought forward a good argument.
What I'm asking you. No, you didn't put forward a good argument. You're misunderstanding the implication here, and so I'm trying to clarify.
You just changed P1. We went through the whole thing.
Yeah, because you're misunderstanding. What I'm saying is that every time something has ever began to exist, every time we've experienced something beginning to exist, it was made by another thing in the universe, right?
Correct.
Okay, and so if everything that begins to exist is made from something that already exists in the universe, we're going to find that means that the universe could not possibly have a beginning. If the universe can't have a beginning, then it wasn't created. If the universe wasn't created, then there's no creator. If there's no creator, then there's no God.
But that's you've just made so many assumptions after C. You just said if the universe had no beginning, that means there's no creator. Can you prove that claim?
Yeah, if the universe didn't begin, then it wasn't created, right? Because to be created means to bring something into existence, right?
So you're defining God right now.
No, I'm defining the word created.
Okay.
Does the word create mean to bring something into existence?
So in your definition, is God a creator?
I'm asking you a question. Does the word create mean to bring something into existence?
Saying the claim.
Does the word create mean to bring something into existence?
Create, yes.
Okay, fantastic. So if the universe, here, we're going to make a new argument for you. If the, premise one, if the universe
That's so awesome, man. You
Didn't-
just like funny, bro.
oh my God, it did begin to exist, then it wasn't brought into existence, right?
If the universe didn't begin to exist, then it was brought into existence. Then it wasn't brought into existence. If the universe wasn't brought into existence, then it wasn't created. The universe wasn't brought into existence and it wasn't created. If the universe wasn't created, then it wouldn't have a creator. If the universe doesn't have a creator, there is no God.
There you go. If the universe didn't begin to exist, then it wasn't brought into existence. That's obvious, right? And if the universe wasn't brought into existence, because the creation means to bring something into existence, then that necessarily means that it wasn't created. If the universe wasn't created, obviously it doesn't have a creator, because for something to have a creator, it has to have been created. If the universe doesn't have a creator, then that means there is no God, because if God exists, then God is the creator. Now, we know from the previous argument that the universe did not begin to exist. That's impossible. So there is no God.
Okay, so what if you change P1 then and say the universe is infinite, so it doesn't have a beginning.
Yeah, that's the whole point. That's why we know there isn't a God. Because if the universe doesn't have a beginning, then it wasn't created. If it wasn't created, it doesn't have a creator. God is the creator, so God doesn't exist.
You can't even wrap your head around infinity. How are you going to put it into 7 bullet
Okay.
points?
Which of these do you reject?
The first one.
Okay, you reject that if the universe didn't begin to exist, then it wasn't brought into existence?
Yeah.
Okay, so explain to me how the universe could be brought into existence without beginning to exist.
Okay. Define universe.
You and I have both been using the word universe this entire conversation. You know what universe means. What I need you to do is demonstrate to me how it's possible for the universe to be brought into existence without beginning to exist.
It's outside of your dimension to understand that.
No, so that what you're saying is you don't have an argument that would demonstrate that, right?
No, because you're in a 3-dimensional.
Do you have an argument that would demonstrate that the universe could both?
Fourth dimension.
Can you demonstrate?
It's literally, I could demonstrate it.
Okay, give me the demonstration.
Okay. In the 4th dimension, everything's all existing at the same time. Did you know that?
That's not true. So,
That is true.
Do you have an actual argument? What you're trying to talk about is something like the B theory of time, but that doesn't say that everything exists at the same time. That just says that all moments in time are equally actual, like equally real.
Everything's
But
already existed.
Yeah, it doesn't exist at the same time.
Yeah, so if everything's already existed,
What you need to demonstrate. What you need to demonstrate.
I got my argument. If everything has already existed, that means you can't point to a certain point in that timeline as the beginning.
I know.
You would see
That's how I win this argument. That's my point. That the universe didn't begin. What you need to hold on. What you need to be demonstrating, is that it's possible for the universe to be brought into existence without having a beginning.
That's okay. That's literally it. So in the 4th dimension, everything has already existed. You're experiencing it at a certain time, but everything
has nothing to do.
Everything in the past has already existed. Everything in the future has already existed. That means that there's no point to say that this is when it started to exist.
Okay, so you're not. Right. This is not giving me any demonstration that the universe could. What are we trying to do? That the universe could be brought into existence without beginning. That's what you need to demonstrate. That you can bring something into existence and without it having a beginning. Can you do that? If not, I'm just going to move on.
Okay, I can do that, but please don't move on once I say this argument.
Hold on. Okay? Here's what I'm gonna write down, just so we both are 100% clear on exactly what's happening right now. Yes. So your job in the dialectic, right, is here's what we're going to say. Egg's job in the dialectic,
I love it.
yeah, is going to be to demonstrate that a thing can come into existence and not have a beginning. So you go ahead and demonstrate that.
Okay, 1 second. Let me think of this. I'm just pulling up the way the G theory. 1 second.
I think you're trying to talk about B theory, but B theory is not going to help you here. So it sounds like you don't have a demonstration for this.
So there's it's the past is infinite, correct?
Yep.
Because the past is infinite, there is no fundamental beginning, but it could exist. It could still have it could still have a beginning, but outside of your dimension, bro. There's no other way to explain it. You're a 3D object. You cannot wrap your head around.
So your argument is to say that you're relying on the principle that you could have a beginning without a beginning. That's what your argument is, that you can have a beginning without having a beginning.
My argument is you can have a beginning to infinite without you can have a beginning to infinite. Yes.
No. Do you remember what your job is?
That's my job.
What's your job? It's right here on the screen.
Demonstrate a thing that can come into existence and not have a beginning.
Yep, you haven't done that.
A creator of all dimensions can bring something can bring an infinite universe into the it can bring an infinite universe into its being.
Yeah, so then it would have a beginning when it was brought into existence. It would begin when it's brought into existence.
He created the infinite, though.
It's possible for it to be infinite into the future, but if it's brought into existence, that's its beginning.
But it could also be infinite in the past.
Yeah. No, not if it was brought into existence. If it's infinite into the past, it wasn't brought into existence. And again, the only argument that you had is just, well, you just don't understand, bro, because it can have a beginning without having a beginning. That's the best argument that you've got for this. If you've got a better one, I'd love to hear it.
A thing may appear to begin within our time slice without absolutely originating in a higher dimension reality.
Right. So that's saying that it appears to have a beginning, but it doesn't actually have a beginning. So that's an example of it not actually coming into existence because even though it appears to come into existence, it didn't. That's what you're saying. So again, we're right back to what I said, which is if the universe didn't begin to exist, then it wasn't brought into existence. You haven't been able to refute that. We're spinning our wheels now, so I am going to move on. I do appreciate the conversation.
Okay, yeah, it was fun. I'll come on some other time.
All right. I hope you have a good one.
You too, man.
Yeah. Good conversation, if nothing else.